Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Ask Shannon. My name is Heather Verity with TBM, and I would like to welcome our host, Shannon Gabriel, Managing Director of Leadership Solutions, along with our guest, Ken Koenemann, Vice President of TBM's Supply Chain and Technology Practices. Welcome, Shannon and Ken. How are y'all doing today?
Doing great, Heather.
Thank you.
So we've been struggling with multiple challenges in the labor market for many years now. And since COVID, supply chain disruptions consistently escalates. So Ken, you talk with many people in supply chain operations, and one of the underlying problems is the lack of talent or the right skills or capabilities to drive improvements. Why is finding talent such a struggle in supply chain operations?
Well, that's a great question to start with. But I think it goes to historically, companies have worked with people and kept them contained within their certain areas. And they were more transactionally focused versus more strategic thinking problem solvers that were be able to sort through and really get to what's going on. And if you look at what's happening today, you have to think broader than just your organization and your supply chain. You have those challenges. You have that inside your planning and scheduling groups, within your purchasing groups. But you also have the labor challenges and talent issues in getting good supervisors to run your warehouses. Your transportation companies are having struggles getting drivers. We've got issues at the docks. And what we're seeing is all of these issues compounded are creating a big challenge for everyone, because we've all been through COVID and everybody knows how important it is to get your goods to your location and to your customers.
Yeah, I'll add on to that a little bit too. And at the beginning, Ken talked about supply chain's been prone to stay just within one dominant area, and you really don't see a lot of cross-functional training that's done. And then you tap onto that, you add on the long tenure. Supply chain leaders and supply chain associates in general tend to stay with one organization for an extended period of time. They hone on the skills, they craft the expertise, and then they stay for an extended period of time without getting the advantage of going from different companies into different organizations and working with different suppliers and having new challenges. So that just exacerbates an already exhausted system and structure.
That's, I think, a great point, Shannon. And people were valued for their knowledge of the product and the product components and the materials that they were buying. They weren't known as or valued for their ability to completely manage an entire supply chain, which is a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So Shannon, you help our clients think differently about how to find the right talent. What do they need to do, or where can they go to find the right talent for their supply chain operations?
Well, what we've been counseling on and consulting on with our clients has been more about the process. And they're taking too long, and they're focused on having an exact set of experience that is perfection, a 10 out of a 10, instead of evaluating who has the majority of what we're asking for and what can we train and develop them into with our on-site talent that we already have and with the leadership team that we already have. So quite often, all too often in this market, they're taking too long, and that right player that they interview could be the very first one, but they continue to interview others just to satisfy the process that they have internally and to make sure they quote unquote get the best fit. So for me, we break down the process to make it more faster and efficient, and with those that have in mind, the long-term strategy of who can we develop into the right next leader inside this organization based on what they bring to the table and what we know we can offer them.
I think adding on to that, Shannon, I would say you're right. We see this quite often where they're trying to get that absolute perfect candidate who has, industry experience or has experience with buying this type of material or component, right? And I would suggest to everyone that time has changed, because right now what we're dealing with and the people you need in supply chain are people who can think under pressure, who can sort through the noise and can get to solutions that are going to get the product where it needs to be.
So we had a client that we were working with a few years back in the plastics industry, and they had consistent turnover and they couldn't figure out why. And as we sat down and just started mapping through it together, we realized quickly, to us, it became very apparent that they continue to hire the same profile. And they would only hire those that were industry experts in plastics. And we had to curtail them away from that because they were bringing them out of, one environment into a very intense environment with a lot of challenges that were facing them head on. And these leaders quickly turned around and gave up and went someplace else. And so we had to get them off the profile that they kept pursuing, which was the exact same profile of themselves. And we had to coach them to go ahead and develop these individuals to learn and master that industry knowledge and product knowledge instead of feeling they had to come into it ready to shoot from day one. And once they changed that model, the turnover numbers went down and their hiring process was extremely successful.
And Ken, you brought up, tactical versus strategic resources. For a company who is creating a new team or developing their current supply chain operations team, how do they determine what they need? Where are the gaps?
Well, I think the question becomes for me is, what is most important? Is it the issue of I'm having issues processing POs, for example, or planning and scheduling my operation? Some of this depends on what's the problem areas that you have. If you step back and think more generically, again, I think you really have to think long and hard about the profile that you're trying to hire. And you could say strategic versus transactional. That would be one perspective. But I think there's another perspective that I mentioned earlier, which is there's personalities that come into play here that will thrive in this more chaotic environment. And supply chain has been chaotic, but it's never been as chaotic as it has been for the last couple of years. And quite frankly, I don't see it changing going forward. So you need people who can be flexible, who can think on their feet, sort through the noise, and find solutions that are going to keep the product flowing for your business. There's a bit of me that says, yeah, you want some of the technical skills, shall we say, but there's certain personality or characteristics of individuals that they may be wanting to look at, and they may want to broaden their search outside of their industry segments.
The one thing I got to that too is we're seeing a tremendous lack of succession planning in supply chain specifically. So if I were evaluating where the gaps are, I would also encourage these companies to make sure that you're looking at, but realistically looking and having those conversations on when they're planning to retire or where you see that you have risk within your current org chart, because that's what I would make sure to double down on, either to start doing the knowledge transfer, start the cross training, and then identify someone on the other side of that is strategic in nature and is going to create that good balance within that supply chain department.
And do that. Look, this is what we spend a lot of time helping organizations do from the process side, is having good documentation of your process and developing standard work around that. So it's much easier to transfer the knowledge, the tribal knowledge, as Shannon said, if you have this documented and it becomes part of your standard working documents or standard operating procedures. It's worth the effort to do this, because as you continue to find people and bring people into an organization, you need easier ways to get them on board.
So, and I'm assuming too, if you don't have the standard work in place, people get frustrated, they leave, they take the knowledge with them, and then you're back to square one again. It's like that vicious cycle of finding the right people, then losing those people, and then finding them again. So how do they, if they don't have that standard work in place right now, what's the best way to get that in place quickly? Any thoughts there?
Well, I think there's a couple different ways, right? So obviously, if you have an internal continuous improvement organization, maybe we should be looking at prioritizing their efforts around some of these core supply chain processes that need to be documented and captured. Or obviously come to somebody like TBM, and we can obviously help you do that and get this processes in place, while at the same time potentially identifying some improvement opportunities, right? The third is hire and embed somebody into your organization for a period of time. In other words, not a full-time hire, but someone who can come in and do this while the rest of the team is fighting the day-to-day fires.
Yeah, when you think about the expense of going through turnover, hire, train, turnover, the cost of that is minimal. It's worth the investment.
Well, that topic could be a whole nother segment of Ask Shannon, to be honest with you. But that brings us to the end of our segment today. And I want to thank you both so much for your insights and expertise. I thank everyone for listening in, and have a great day.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Heather.